Hi, this is Haas from GNAT News, and today we're in Arlington again, and this is part 2 of everything you want to know about chocolate. In part 1, Denise told us about...
We learned about the history of chocolate, where it comes from, and today you're going to learn about how chocolate is grown and harvested, produced, manufactured.
And your dad's going to teach us that.
Yeah, he is.
All right, okay.
Let's go.
Yes.
Here we go.
Okay,
Let's
here
go.
we go.
So now we're ready to learn a little bit about where chocolate comes from and how chocolate is made. Chocolate grows mainly in the rainforest within 20 degrees or 15 degrees of the equator. It requires some the climate that's moist and the trees like shade.
So that's why we couldn't grow it in a greenhouse, because they're actual trees. They're huge.
They're trees. They're not bushes. They're actual trees.
Got it, okay.
What happens is there's tiny little flowers that grow on the main branches and the trunk of the tree. Of those flowers, about 10% will actually bear fruit. The fruits are these cacao pods, and then from that point, the farmer has to harvest them by hand. There's no mechanical way of harvesting a cacao tree because, first of all, the season is continuous. There may be some pods on the tree that are ready to be harvested and some that are not. So the farmer has to have the knowledge to know which one of those trees can be harvested.
Nick, do they know why there's so few flowers that actually turn into the pods?
Well, they depend on a little bug that lives on the bottom layer of the rainforest. He's called the midge.
The midge.
The midge is the one that does the pollinating of the tree. And because of how the flowers grow right on the trunk and the main branches of the tree, sometimes they don't get pollinated properly.
Got it.
So they die off.
So they have a harvest.
They harvest it. A farmer will either take a long pull knife or a machete and cut the pods from the tree. And then from that point on, they have to be fermented, which is a very important part of the production of chocolate. Sometimes that fermentation process can be done right in the field. A lot of times, depending on the country of origin, there's holes dug right in the ground, lined with banana leaves, and the beans are left to ferment right in those pits. It takes usually around 5 or 6 days for that process to happen. And then during that time, there's all kinds of chemical changes that happens to those beans. The beans on the inside of this pod, there's approximately 52 beans on the inside of this pod. They, at that point, really don't taste anything like chocolate. They have kind of a sweet, sour kind of a taste. The Indians would eat the beans and then spit them out, as they would suck all that juice off of it, spit them out, and then because of the bacteria in your mouth, more trees would grow from those beans that were spit out. That's one of the stories that is told about how chocolate really started to develop. After the beans have been fermented, the next process is that they have to be dried. A lot of times they're spread on the tarmac. Sometimes they're put in bins, and they're allowed to dry in the natural sunlight. That process, again, can take some time. They have to be raked and moved around constantly in order for the beans to be dried properly and evenly. These beans are then put in burlap bags, big burlap bags like this. They're put in these burlap bags, and then they're shipped to factories where they start their process to be made into chocolate. At that point, now we can start calling them cocoa. Up until that point, they are still cacao. So at the factory now, they are put in these big round drums, which rotate constantly, and depending on what the manufacturer wants to accomplish and what kind of flavor they actually want to develop in that bean, and the variety of the bean, they are roasted. And during that time now they start to develop a little flavor and the aroma of chocolate. After they are roasted, they are allowed to cool. This is a roasted bean here. And then they're put through what is called a winnowing machine. That winnowing machine cracks the shell, takes and removes the shell from the bean, and the inside of the cocoa bean are these little bits of chocolate that are called nibs. These are called chocolate nibs.
Is that what's on this plate?
That's what's on this plate. These are edible. They're good, and even now at this point, they have a nice little nutty flavor to them. But even now at this point, it's hard to really identify them as chocolate.
Now, just out of curiosity, do people eat these? Is this
Yes.
something you would find
yes,
as a
absolutely.
snack? Or?
Absolutely. They eat them now. My son, for instance, likes it in his cereal in the morning.
Got it. I got it.
And there's chocolate bars being made with it. There's even chocolate-covered cocoa nibs. So
Gotcha.
and they're good for you because it's the pure thing. It's pure chocolate. So after they are winnowed and these little nibs come out, now it's time to really start making the process of the chocolate. So these beans are ground in a machine called a melanger. During that time, there's two heavy stone wheels that constantly grind these beans and mash them. That process can take 2 days, 3 days sometimes, depending again on what the manufacturer is trying to accomplish. But they are ground until really they become almost a liquid form. At that point, when they become liquid, you get something that we call chocolate liquor. No alcohol in it. It's the essence of the chocolate. It's the real chocolate. Now that liquid that comes from the cacao, from the nibs,
Yep.
can either be pressed at that point. They're put in these heavy rollers and press machines, set one on top of another, and pressed. And during that time, the cocoa butter that's the natural fat. This is cocoa butter. This is the natural fat that's in chocolate. This is considered the good fat, like olive oil.
Gotcha.
So that is extracted from the chocolate liquor, and then what they do is they take it out, because this is one of the most expensive parts of making chocolate. The cocoa butter is one of the most important and expensive pieces of that chocolate, because this cocoa butter has many other uses, hand creams and lotions and that kind of stuff. So it has a lot of uses. So after that's been extracted, a powder is formed. And that's kind of pressed together, and what you get is what we call a press cake. That press cake can then be pulverized, made into cocoa powder. That cocoa powder then can also be used to make chocolate. The next important part of making chocolate is a process called conching. This conching machine kind of kneads the chocolate, and it kind of swirls, it keeps swirling the chocolate around and around. That process can last 4 to 5 days, depending again on what the end result that the manufacturer really wants to accomplish. From that point on, the chocolate is ready to be either molded and put into blocks so that it can come to stores to make their confections out of, or made into different kinds of chocolate pieces at that point. That's pretty much the history of how chocolate is produced. It's a very long process that makes me wonder many times on how we can get a piece of chocolate for the price that we pay for it. Because there's a lot of people along the way
I hear you.
that have to make some kind of a profit on it before you can actually get to enjoy it.
So Nick, one last question. Do you think you'll ever get tired of chocolate?
Oh, I love chocolate. I eat chocolate every day, and I like the flavor of chocolate. I'm not a big candy eater, but I do love chocolate.
That's it for part 2 of everything you want to know about chocolate. If you missed part 1, you should watch part 1. That was pretty cool too. And thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. This is Haas from GNAT News.